tafsir. We have their statements, what they have said. And he says other great imams amongst the Sahaba, and he was talking about Ibn Mas'ud. And a very amazing statement from Ibn Mas'ud. He states that any ayah that is there in the Quran, I know when it was revealed, why it was revealed, for every single ayah. And he is so bold as to say, and this is, Sahaba don't just make these statements. Whenever they say something, they have something to back it up with. So it's a true statement. He says, if I'm aware of an individual who knows more tafsir than me, and you can reach him by animal or any method possible, if I was aware of that, I would definitely go there. But he's not, because he doesn't know of anyone who knows more tafsir than himself. So this is a very amazing thing from Ibn Mas'ud. And he also states, Abu Abdurrahman al-Sulami, Imam Ibn Kathir states that someone who learned Quran from the Sahaba, and they obviously learned from Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, they stated that the Sahaba used to learn 10 ayahs at a time. They would not surpass those 10 ayahs until they understand those ayahs and they put it into practice. That's actually where we left off yesterday, talking about the method of the Sahaba, how they would learn Quran. You and I, when we learn Quran, you'll see we'll just read through the ayat and things like that and then move on. But the Sahaba were keen on learning for the sake of practice. And that's a huge difference between us and Sahaba. Sometimes we state that we learn for practice, but is it truly the reason that we're learning? So they would pause. They would actually stop learning until those were put into practice, and then they would receive another 10 ayahs. So Imam Ibn Kathir then states, among the great scholars of tafsir is Abdullah bin Mas'ud, and he moves on to Abdullah ibn Abbas, the cousin of Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, very famous for his tafsir. The Ibn Am Rasulillah, meaning the son of the uncle of Rasulullah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Abbas radiallahu anhu was like 3 years older than Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, but he's his uncle. And Ibn Abbas was very young when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed, not even baligh when Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam passed away. And he is called Tarjumanul Quran. Tarjumanul Quran is like spokesperson of Quran, or the interpreter of the Quran. This was a title given to Ibn Abbas. And Ibn Kathir says, بِبَرَكَةِ دُعَاءِ رَسُولِ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وسلم حيث قال اللهم فقهه في الدين وعلمه التأويل. So once Ibn Abbas was serving Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a young boy, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam went to relieve himself, and Ibn Abbas saw this. He wasn't told by anyone, and he prepared like the water and the miswak and everything for Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam as a child. He's very keen about serving Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So when he did this, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was so happy, as like it's his cousin, but he saw him as a little boy, like his own son kind of. He was so happy, he made a dua for him, and that dua was, "Oh Allah, give him a depth of knowledge in Islam and Deen, and give him the understanding of interpretation. Allahumma faqihu fi deen, make him a faqih, wa'allimhu ta'wil, and teach him interpretation." And through the barakah of this dua, he became the greatest interpreter of the Quran, the greatest mufassir of Quran, even at a very young age. And then he brings another narration. He says that Abdullah bin Mas'ud, who we talked about previously, said, "Ni'ma tarjumanul Quran ibn Abbas." The best interpreter of Quran is Ibn Abbas. We talked about Ibn Mas'ud saying that if I know someone who knows more than me, I would go to them. And he says, what a great interpreter of Quran is Ibn Abbas. And then he states that Ibn Abbas also said, he repeats this statement in various different narrations. I'm just skipping over these different riwayat because Ibn Kathir's style is that if he quotes a hadith, he'll quote like from Bukhari or something like that, but he'll quote it verbatim with the chain of narration. So sometimes you have to sift through the chains of narration. So Ibn Kathir then, he's showing the level of Ibn Abbas in tafsir. He says Ibn Mas'ud, who was a huge scholar in tafsir, he passed away in the year 32 after Hijri. So 32 in that year is when Ibn Mas'ud passed away. And Ibn Mas'ud in his lifetime states that Ibn Abbas is one of the greatest interpreters of Quran. Ibn Abbas then lived another 36 years after the passing of Ibn Mas'ud. So you guys can do the math. 32 plus 36, that is the year in which Ibn Abbas passed away. Much later, because he was very young. So Ibn Kathir, he says, فَمَا ظَنُّكَ بِمَا كَسَبَهُ مِنَ الْعُلُومِ بَعْدَ ابْنِ مَسْعُودٍ. What do you think in that period of time, there's another 36 years, how much more knowledge did Ibn Abbas gain in those 36 more years? If Ibn Mas'ud is saying Ibn Abbas is one of the best mufassirs of Quran, and Ibn Mas'ud passes away, and 36 more years later is when Ibn Abbas passes away, Ibn Kathir is saying, what do you think happened in those 36 years? He must have became exponentially more greater in knowledge of tafsir. Because one thing about tafsir is, of course, we take it from Quran and Hadith, but there's a component of tafsir that comes from the self. If a person is very pious, a person reflects, a person has experience in the world, he can do tafsir to a high degree. So he had 36 more years than Ibn Mas'ud. And Ibn Kathir is saying that this is a sign that he was a great... I will just mention it, and I'll go a little bit over time, just so that we can understand. This is the masala of quoting Ahlul Kitab. So the narrations that we find in the Bible and the Injil, these are termed Isra'iliyat. Isra'iliyat, meaning narrations from Banu Israel. So we call them Isra'iliyat. Now there's, scholars break this down into three categories. What you can find in the books of previous nations, namely the Jews and Christians. These stories, information, verses can be broken down into three categories. Number one is you find something that matches what is in the Quran. You might find a story in the Quran, you find the same story in the Bible. Number two, you find something that contradicts the Quran. For instance, what they say about Lut alayhi salam, what they say about different Anbiya, what they say about Sulaiman alayhi salam, his ring got stolen and then the jinn came and sat on his chair and ruled instead of Sulaiman alayhi salam. Very wacky stories out there about what took place. You can find them in the Bible and the Torah. And then number three, things that you can find in the Bible and Torah that there's no mention of in the Quran, but it doesn't contradict. So each of these three facets, so either it's the same as the Quran, it's contradictory to the Quran, or it's neutral, meaning the Quran doesn't talk about it and it doesn't contradict. So these three will have different rulings. The first one, if you find a story with the Ahlul Kitab that matches the Quran, you can utilize that. There's no problem, you can use it, because this we know is not corrupt. Because the Quran is called the Furqan, it is a criterion. It judges over everything. So if the Quran is having the story and this story is matching, that means it was not tampered with. There are portions of Bible and Injil, they're not tampered with. Number two, if you find something that's contradictory, you're not allowed to quote that, except if you are trying to show how they have corrupted. So you can't go and say, okay, these bad things about Lut alayhi salam. Not only that, it has ajib stories that, he, I don't even want to say it, because Lut alayhi is a Nabi of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. These are perfect human beings. Very odd things about the prophets. Very odd things about Dawood alayhi salam. The Jews don't even consider Dawood alayhi salam and Sulaiman alayhi salam, to my knowledge, as prophets. Right? They were kings. So you find it contradictory to what's in the Quran. So the only reason you should be quoting such a thing is to tell people that this is a fabrication. Kind of like what we talked about regarding fabricated meat. And then number three, this is the most interesting part. Something found in Torah and Injil that the Quran doesn't talk about at all, and it doesn't contradict anything. So then he's going to talk about what to do with those type of stories and lessons that you find in the Bible and Injil. They can be quoted, but some things have to be put into place. It's a little bit funny also what he's going to talk about, that sometimes he says it's useless. Ibn Kathir says that section is useless because whatever is useful is in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala got rid of all the useless things. He says examples such as, what color was the dog of Ashab al-Kahf? What was his fur like? What tree did Musa alayhi salam's staff come from? What were the birds that Ibrahim alayhi salam had to slaughter? Was it a peacock? Was it a pigeon? A crow? who cares? Right? But he says you can quote it, and some scholars have, but there's a methodology that he uses. He says if you don't follow this methodology, you're not doing a good job. And that we'll talk about, inshallah, on Monday. So now we're on the section of Isra'iliyat, utilizing information from Bible and Torah for Tafsir of Quran. So this has been done, and it's not impermissible, as Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam gives clarification. But there's a caveat. You don't quote things that go against Quran. So we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for tawfiq and understanding and practice. Sallallahu tabarak wa ta'ala ala khayri khalqi Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in bi rahmatihi ya arhamar rahimin. Assalamu alaikum.
क्या नाम उमेर पानी की मैं सऊदी में पूरी एजुकेशन स्कूल इंटरनेशनल स्कूल चाकरी क्या सेकंड भाई के साथ पढ़े हो गए ना उस्मान भाई अभी
reported about them that they have
ये कभी अपडेट नहीं हुआ वो
it's reported from them that they have narrators. Yeah, basically, you should read it.
घर में इतना तेजी सही है अल्लाह में
So I might even skip it. All those weird. Oh, this might know. Is that alright? No, I know. Yeah, you can follow along. Even though like I don't read everything. I just see some people.
I've got to get my feet
You can like read it all, and then I wouldn't have done even a paragraph, and then you could just follow along.
I'll just change it. Your summary is very good. Says your it's not the first.
No, I really
Because like you bypass all this guys that real quick.
that's why I was pausing. Senate here, Senate here. The trick with the Senate is you have to see the actual name that matters.
Yeah.
Cut all the whole thing out.
If it's okay with you, can we try to do this?
I'll send it. I do find a PDF of it. I look at it. But sometimes I walk in and try to read.
You're saying the PDFs are the ones that are
There's some really good ones too. I think there's a better version of it than this one. In physical, and I think the PDF of that one it's more edited, better edited. Yeah. Actually, that one is kind of expensive. So I was like,
I shared this one.
Okay. It's in English.
And this one is free. The subsequent ones are the physical one.
Advertised.
I think no, this is a good part of it.
Yeah. 1 of 30. Okay, first juice. You should have the